It's episode 50 of Out of Office, and you are in for a treat today. My guest is one of the most recognizable faces in the remote work biz, one of LinkedIn's top voices on the topic. He's been featured in the Harvard Business Review, spoken at South by Southwest, and somehow still finds time to make me smile every single Wednesday with a remote work tip on Instagram. Kaleem Clarkson, welcome to Out of Office.
Hey, Andrew, what's happening, man?
For our topic today, you chose to talk about social connection. So I'd love to hear what led you to become passionate about that topic.
Going all the way back to high school, I tried to pride myself in hanging out with as many people as possible. And then when I went to college, I had a really good time there. Ended up enjoying throwing some parties. Learned about hey, people like to learn around kegs too. Call it keg learning. You would think something as simple as a college keg party is all like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah, I gotta say, I didn't expect keg parties as the answer to that question.
I realized after throwing a good amount of them that I enjoyed seeing everyone else have a good time. Mm-hmm. Then I started realizing these events, the reason why I'm kind of gravitating towards these events, it's all about connection.
And how do workplaces come into that?
Then I started seeing the relationship between myself and my coworkers. And I started realizing, wow, when you look at a lot of the big challenges in remote work, they all revolve around connection.
And I'd love for you to unpack that a little more. What led you to draw that conclusion?
So big shout out to Buffer. I think they are one of the best at doing the state of remote work report. So there's a report, and one of their questions that they have is like, what's your biggest struggle with working remotely? I stay home too often because I don't have a reason to leave. Just straight up loneliness. Working across time zones, difficulty collaborating and communicating with my coworkers. Those are all directly related to connection.
Yeah.
That's almost 60% of all of the challenges. So when you look at things like that, to me, it's obvious what the challenges of remote work are.
It's interesting that some people would use the same data to suggest that remote work is a failed experiment. So you've reached the conclusion that this is a solvable problem, that connection is a human problem, which is exacerbated in remote work scenarios, but that it's absolutely solvable. Can you talk to me about some of those strategies for how distributed teams can overcome the challenges from the change in connection dynamic from in-person collaboration to distributed teams?
So we break our connections down into three big categories. The first connection is professional connections. And I think for the most part, people kind of understand that, right? Like in a work setting, I have a mentor, I have a coach, I have an advisor. Then you have lifestyle connections. And I think for a lot of people, this is kind of another obvious second connection. So your friendships, around your hobbies, things you enjoy outside of work, personal well-being. I personally like to mountain bike a little bit. And then last but not least, intimate. And this is where people get very uncomfortable when you talk about
workplace
setting.
Intimacy, dangerous topic, right?
Kind of makes a lot of people kind of, cringe when they hear about intimacy and corporate and corporations kind of being involved in that. But when I'm presenting on this, I love to ask the audience, hey, please raise your hand if you know of someone who met their significant other at work. And almost the whole room raises their hand.
Yeah.
Right? So what we try to talk about is that, if all of the research shows that you need to have these three different types of connections for you to be your full self, then why are organizations not focusing on these different types of connections that maybe your remote or hybrid employees are either lacking or maybe they have a lot of? So we really kind of talk about each of those and then creating what we say a social connection strategy, right? It's a plan of action to provide intentional opportunities for employees to build professional, lifestyle, and intimate connections. We're not saying go out and create a dating night, but if you have a lot of single employees, right? Them being single and not having opportunities to meet other people can impact their mental health. can impact their performance.
Loneliness is such a personal problem, right? It's easy for people to see that as something for an individual to discuss with their therapist. What would you say to someone who says, I don't want to overstep, that's not my role, or what's in it for me? How does this help my bottom line and my objectives? What would you say to them?
I mean, I would just say what we've learned is that the whole person impacts performance. It impacts performance individually, it impacts performance for the team, and then it impacts the overall performance of the company. So that alone, I think, is plenty enough. But I would just say, I haven't really told this story publicly, but I had a sister who committed suicide this year. And
I'm so sorry.
It's been super tough. She got a master's degree at Cornell University, was there for 20 years, and she was single. And I remember her landing her job that was remote, working with students who wanted to get into school. I just remember her over the past few years just talking about how lonely she was, because her social circles where she was getting all of her connection was from work in person. And, I probably, when this happens to a family member, you ask yourself all these questions over and over about like, what could you have done? And I think, we're as a family, we're kind of past that. But the reality of the situation is, as an employee, like there's a part of me that's like, okay, we kind of knew that she was lonely and we were trying our best. Mm-hmm. But what was her place of employment doing?
Yeah.
What were they doing? They were a fully remote company and they were just getting work done and they helped as best as they could. But what were they doing from a perspective of ensuring that like, hey, are you okay? Like we're fully remote, so we can't see you every day. So yeah, I would say to that person, if you could save somebody's life, right? Way more important than the damn job. Like, yeah, the job is there, but like, if somebody from the team can notice that something's not right and cares that somebody is not fully engaged and fully connected in life, then what are we all kind of doing this shit for? I know you asked me that question. I was just trying to think of a different answer, but like, I think that was it's a prime example by accident. She had professional love.
Yeah.
She had friendships, but she was really missing that intimate romantic partner. And who knows what could have happened if somebody would have noticed that. It's not always just about performance. It's not always just about the job, but like, damn it, we're human beings, man.
Wow, you bring tears to my eyes, honestly, Kaleem. It's a humbling reminder that connection is such a fundamental human need. It's very hard to imagine that any individual in that state of desperation where they're lacking one of those fundamental human needs could possibly be doing their best work. Seeing it as a function of the workplace to help ensure those needs are met makes perfect sense. There's a lot of food for thought here. One practical question I have for you is how do you measure social connectedness? How can a company really know if they're getting it right, getting it wrong? What should they look at?
Identify the connections that we're talking about. Identify what types of questions you're going to ask to determine the levels of connectedness. So for example, if you have a strategy where you're like, okay, we're going to do 5 online events, 1 online event a quarter, 1 annual retreat, 2 regional retreats, and you have this whole kind of map of all these different connection strategies that you have. I think a combination between participation and looking at what your employee engagement scores were already and like comparing them, I think that would be a really, really, really good good option to kind of determine if you're doing a good enough job.
Would you say that team level tactics are likely to be more beneficial than company-wide tactics, like a massive Zoom happy hour or some of that kind of thing that we've seen larger companies doing? Like, if you had to focus your energy in one direction, would it be the big stuff or the smaller stuff?
I would say it would all depend, right? Like, so in an organization where, let's just say, you don't have very many lifestyle connections, right? Like, okay, in order for those connections to increase, you most likely have to go outside of your team because maybe your team doesn't have those lifestyle connections, right? I would say, depending on where the deficit is, that's where you would put a lot of your energy. I think, for example, the annual retreat is a big one, right? So the annual retreat, that's for the whole company. While if you're spending a ton of money on this retreat, flying everybody to one place, you might want to start with, okay, are we ensuring that there's enough connections at the annual retreat in each one of those buckets?
Then there's also, I've heard varying versions of, we tried Zoom happy hours, but nobody likes it anymore, or people didn't come, or yada, yada. No, so we stopped them. I've heard a lot of companies kind of stop there. What are the really practical things that someone could just do tomorrow that'll start to move the needle in the right direction?
My thought was that the pandemic made working a lot more human. And I think, and I'm hoping that sticks, right? Like, hey, we can make money, but hey, by the way, Andrew, I haven't seen you in Slack lately, or I haven't seen you in Teams. And the last time we talked, you were kind of looking down. You weren't really engaged. Is everything all okay with you, bro? Like, you all good? So if you're lonely and isolated, helping somebody else feel seen, helping someone else with being lonely and isolated has a major impact on your own personal feeling of connection. You don't have to be a manager or a leader to help someone be seen.
Wise words. Thank you so much, Kaleem. And if anyone watching this from home wants to hear more from Kaleem Clarkson, here is where you can follow him. And I'll see you next time. In the meantime, the future of work is out of office.